All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Welcome to the X Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Worldwide toll-free 1-800-610-7035. Email xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV, and our website where you can listen to the X Zone 724-365 is www.xzoneradiotv.com. Exonation, my guest this first hour of tonight's show is Tom Williams, and he is the author of Surrounded by Thunder, the story of Darrell Lone and the Rocket Men. And it's going to be a very interesting hour, especially with what happened last week with the landing of the spacecraft or the probe on the comet. Exciting times. You know, we're looking at going back to the moon. We're looking at going back to Mars, and so many things are happening. And first of all, Tom, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Rob. Thanks for having me. Well, I'm a writer living here in Southwest Florida. I've got a balmy 68 degrees outside right now.
Ooh, that's it. Rub it in.
Yeah, I know. It's tough. I know. We were just speaking earlier about 6 feet of snow coming in the Great Lakes region. Wow. Well, anyhow, I've been a writer down in Southwest Florida for about 20 years, and Surrounded by Thunder was really a big hit this year at the Florida Book Awards when it took the gold medal for nonfiction. And it was very exciting, and I think one of the most exciting parts was when my wife and I took Darrell Lone to Tallahassee and were, presented at the governor's mansion. Florida's first lady who presented the awards. It was really exciting, and to watch Darrell was one of the top engineers at NASA, and he was, if you remember Apollo 13, he was one of the guys sitting in the front row, and they go down the line. The flight director go, okay, we're going to flight. Guidos go, Fidos go, Retros go. And as they went on down the line, they did that every 15 minutes to make sure everything was running smoothly. So he was one of those guys, and he's now 85, and to have him with us and his life story applauded with a gold medal was really exciting. So, I really don't know what to say else about that, but any questions that you might have?
Yeah, where did your interest in the space program come from?
Well, my first book is called Lost and Found, and it was awarded top 5 must take on vacation by Sport Diver magazine last summer.
Right.
And that book the premise is a Texas oil company launches a satellite to look for oil fields. It's a satellite searching for minerals in the ground that would point to future oil fields, and in the story, it's not working. So these guys in charge, the technicians in charge, reprogram the satellite to look for a more specific mineral in the ground, and they're looking for superconductors, and it turns out it finds little tight bundles of gold on the seafloor that turn out to be lost treasure ships. And the book's Lost and Found, and so it has a little edge to space to it with the satellite technology. And after that, I was contacted by this lady in Iowa, and she says, I want you to write my dad's life story. He was one of the top engineers at NASA. He invented a cruise missile. And I'm like, wow. And it just so happens I live on Marco Island, Florida, and he spends the winter here, and that's how she contacted me. And she said, I want you to meet with him and see if you could do this. So I started meeting with Darrell and hearing his stories, and Darrell graduated in 1957 with a 4.0 grade point average in aeronautical engineering from the University of Iowa, and he just got snatched up by Sperry Corporation in New York, and they were making the missile system, the Sparrow missile system, that the Navy thought was going to make the United States invincible. It was a forerunner for the Patriot missile.
Right.
And it's just one thing after another. And then, of course, he graduated, in the spring of 1957 with a 4.0 in aeronautical engineering. And guess what happens? In October, the Russians launched Sputnik, and the world changed. And this book, Surrounded by Thunder, just chronicles all of those wonderful events, and it really starts to snowball. I think what makes the book fun is it doesn't read like a textbook at all. I was writing it, and I started writing it like a biography, and one of my friends, a playwright in New York, Howard Blankman, he said, Tom, he goes, you're good at dialogue. He goes, that's what you should do. You should write this thing as historical narrative. And I thought, oh my God, he's right. So I just threw the first 50 pages away and I started over. And so this book, you crack it open and it starts like a novel. And the characters tell a story, and what a cast of characters.
All right, Tom, we're going to have to take a commercial break here. Please stand by. Exonation Tom Williams is our special guest this hour. He's the author of Surrounded by Thunder, the story of Darrell Lone and the Rocket Men. His website is www.lostandfoundadventure.com. And Tom and I will be back on the other side of this 2-minute commercial break from our studios here in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, in the X Zone. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. My guest this hour is Tom Williams. He's the author of Surrounded by Thunder, the story of Darrell Lone and the Rocket Man, and his website is www.lostandfoundadventure.com. So tell me, Tom, why did you write Surrounded by Thunder?
Well, it was just a book that had to be written, Rob. When I sit down with Darrell Lone, and he's the principal in the book, and he started telling me all these wonderful stories when he was a very young man, who just graduated with a 4.0 in aeronautical engineering, and the Russians launched Sputnik, and it was the time in the world when everybody believed that, oh my God, we're going to have a nuclear war any second, and whoever has the best missiles is going to win the war. And so there was just open floodgates on the money. It was like, okay, we need to beat the Russians in space, and it was a time in America where everyone was digging a backyard bomb shelter. Just the fear of the hydrogen bomb was so vivid in everyone's mind. And when he started telling me all these stories, I just had to write this book, and it was just absolutely overwhelming. The time in America between the Russians launching Sputnik and Americans landing on the moon was only 12 years. Just an amazing, amazing time.
What do you hope that readers will take away from reading your book?
Well, I believe that inspiration is really what somebody will take away from this. And I'm really hoping this book finds its way into school for like high school reading, because when you read about what these individuals did in this 12-year period of putting men into space basically on a monthly basis. It wasn't like, oh, we're going to launch once a year. These guys it was the golden age of space exploration, and incredible goals that were conquered basically every month. And when you think about guys that had never been, they're test pilots, true, but no one had ever climbed aboard, a ballistic missile, which is basically what these early rockets were, and climbed into orbit at 17,500 miles an hour. It's just unbelievable. I think you're really going to just find a lot of inspiration in this, and I think future generations will also be inspired by one of the greatest things that's ever happened.
What did you get personally out of writing this book?
Well, I'll tell you this: when I've been writing for a long time, and when you find a good story, like I've done hundreds of newspaper magazine articles, and I've done like one time I got to interview this smuggler. He was a pot smuggler in Southwest Florida, and he told me how he went up to Fort Myers Beach, and him and these other guys bought a shrimp boat, and they smuggled pot from Kingston, Jamaica, and he did it 50 times. And, he's like, I'm out of jail. I paid my fine. I can talk about it. That was a really fun story, And my first book, Lost and Found, it was a fun story, but I never got goosebumps by those stories like I did with Surrounded by Thunder. When you read about these guys climbing on board these incredibly dangerous machines, the very most high-tech thing at the time, and soaring into space and just, oh my gosh, it just, every time I read it, even during the last proofing, I got goosebumps from it. That's what I got. It was just like one of the greatest things of my life. I know it was.
Who inspired you as an up-and-coming author?
I think writers write who they like.
Mm-hmm.
They emulate a writing style. And I am not a person that is really a big fan of first-person writing. I like people that write in the third person.
Right.
Like James Clavell, Shogun, Taipan, Noble House, those, wonderful, wonderful epic stories where you can smell and taste it, and the sound, the day. And Ken Follett also, I think, writes like that, and Michael Crichton, where you've got a wonderful story. I mean, the characters really do come to life. I think my writing style emulates that, and been compared to a couple of those writers.
Just something you said before, that you hope that your book finds its way into the school system. Why? Well,
simply because there's never been anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
The Russians launched Sputnik in October 1957.
Right.
And they polished it so that it would shine as it crossed over North America.
Mm-hmm.
We could see it come over every 96 minutes, and it was just a constant reminder that we were behind. And I think as we go along in the world and realize when you've got something like that going over your head every 96 minutes, and you've got to step up and meet the goal.
Right.
And I think that goal and realizing that and that was achievable will be a good example for the future.
But with today's technology and kids having all the information in the world that they want at their fingertips, I'm having a bit of a problem understanding the significance. I understand it from your point of view, but when it comes to getting something into the scholastic system with today's technology, how would this book advance the life of a child?
I think by inspiring them to go think outside of the box, mm-hmm. and do things that no one's ever done. Because, as an example, in Surrounded by Thunder, the challenges are chronicled all throughout the book, mm-hmm. Of how different obstacles had to be overcome, and these guys, they just would never take no for an answer. I think today, children can always learn that if you can't go through, you have to go around to get mm-hmm. to the goal. And when this book teaches to think outside of the box, I mean, these guys were really thinking outside of the box. I mean, they had problems that were like monumental problems, and they just, Dr. Werner von Braun would put his hands on these guys' shoulders and say, "Listen, we're going to make this work," with his German accent. He says, "We can't be defeated. If we're defeated here, everybody knows that the communists mm-hmm. can win a third world war. We got to show the world that we're the best, that the free world is the best." And I think just, showing this new generation that does have technology at their fingertips, that thinking outside of the box and around the corner is a true way to advance and be better.
But isn't that what we're teaching our children in school today? How to think outside the box and how to achieve the impossible?
Yeah, but you can always inspire somebody.
Mm-hmm.
You can always inspire, and this book is totally inspirational. I mean, how often do you read something that's going to give you goosebumps? And when you read about, okay, these three guys climbed aboard a Saturn V rocket that was mm-hmm. 363 feet tall. It weighed 6.2 million pounds fueled, and when it launched, it burned 15 tons of liquid oxygen and kerosene, Jet A kerosene, a second. 15 tons a second. When I heard those figures and Darrell was telling me that, I'm like, what? He's 85. He must be, must be wrong. That couldn't be right. 15 tons of fuel a second? Yes, it's true. It's right. And just to read about something like that happened, we just don't see that scale anymore.
But isn't it true?
There's never been anything like that.
But isn't it true, Tom, up until the time that Apollo 13 had its near disaster, that the American public was losing interest in the space race?
I think because the goal was so big, and so everyone was sitting around going, "Oh, that'll never happen. That'll never happen. They'll never make it to the moon."
But they had
and then we did.
Yeah.
And then we did. I think it was a little bit like, it's like, okay, we all remember Columbus, crossing the ocean. Well, who was the second guy to ever cross? Yeah. I don't know. I can't remember.
Especially the way history's written, we know for a fact that Columbus wasn't the first person to discover the Americas.
And even maybe the Chinese were.
Yeah,
but still, it's just an example. Yeah.
It seems to me the Russians were the first to land on the moon with a robotic spacecraft.
The Russians, they had spacecraft orbiting the moon and crashed on the moon in 1959.
Yeah.
That was very, very advanced.
So
they were really advanced, and
I see one of the things I don't understand is why did America have to go to the moon? What was it? Was it ego? Was it a PR ploy? Was it flexing the muscles? Was it testosterone?
Well, here's what it was. This is exactly what it was. All the emerging nations at the time. We're coming into, we're advancing and emerging, and there was two superpowers. There was the United States, and there was the Soviet Union.
Right.
And all of these emerging nations were looking around and looking at each other and say, whose side are you going to be on? And one thing's for sure, we don't want to be on the losing side. And so whoever controls space is going to win the Third World War. We're just lining those ducks up in a row like this is the way it's going to happen. And so as this progressed and this line of thinking kept continuing, Dr. Wernher von Braun wrote a letter to President Kennedy, and he said, let me tell you something. He said, the world will know that we can win the battle against the communists if we land a man on the moon in this decade. And that's why Kennedy made his famous speech, because Dr. Wernher von Braun made that letter and sent it to President Kennedy. And he wrote the same letter to President Eisenhower and told him that I can get a satellite up into space in a month if you let me do it.
Let me ask you this. That's really cool, but the Russians had already done it. The Russians won.
Yes, but they hadn't sent a manned mission to the moon.
They didn't think it was necessary. And has anybody asked the questions, why didn't Russia send a man to the moon when they've already landed a robotic spacecraft there?
Yeah, here's the trick to that.
All right, we've got to take our news break. break. You can give me the answer when we get back from this break. Exonation, we're talking to Tom Williams this hour. He's the author of Surrounded by Thunder, the story of Darrell Lone and the Rocket Men. His website is www.lostandfoundadventure.com. That's www.lostandfoundadventure.com. And Tom and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't forget, X Zone Nation, you can always now go to www.xzoneradiotv.com and listen to the show 724, 365. I'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.
I'm Rob McConnell, and welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Today on the X Zone, what is the Star of Bethlehem? Who would ever have thought that the Rosetta Stone to the identity of the Star of Bethlehem would have been found on an ancient Roman coin that was purchased in the spring of 1991 by astronomer and coin collector Dr. Michael Molnar. Upon examining his newly acquired coin, Dr. Molnar noticed that the inscription of the coin was actually telling an astrological story about the Star of Bethlehem. Using his facilities at Rutgers University and the philosophy of astrology, Dr. Molnar was able to identify the Star of Bethlehem as a rare planetary alignment of the planet Jupiter, being in the house of Aries on April the 17th, 6 BC, the birth date of Jesus Christ. These findings were supported by additional findings as well.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And my guest this hour is Tom Williams. He is the author of Surrounded by Thunder, the story of Darrell Lone and the Rocketmen. And his website is lostandfoundadventure.com. Tom, before we went to the news break, I basically said, all right, if it was a race to the moon, the Russians won. They were there first. So why was it so important that we risk all these men, spend all this money on a feat that already had been accomplished?
Yeah, but I think what we're saying here, Rob, is you're thinking, okay, well, the Russians have already been there with a drone, right?
Yeah.
They'd sent a robot rocket to the moon and it circled, and they crashed into it in 1959.
Right.
So okay, they had won that.
Yeah.
We were there first. But America, we've got Hollywood, and we just got to go everything big. And I think when Dr. Werner von Braun wrote President Kennedy, he said, I can send a manned mission to the moon. He did that thought and that plan with the calculation that he realized the numbers. These guys were the ultimate rocket scientists, and they realized to get a manned mission to the moon, you've got to have a launch vehicle that could lift 125 tons into a low Earth orbit, and then another 50 tons to the moon. And he was just betting that the Russians couldn't lift that much payload and carry a manned mission to the moon. And it turns out that was exactly true, because in December 1968, the Russians had their N-1 rocket pretty much ready to go, and intelligence sources reported that they had 3 cosmonauts that were ready to go and orbit the moon. And that would have been the big race again, and the Russians would have won. Now, in 1968, the American space program, Grumman, who made the lunar landing module, were not ready. They had some problems, and their spacecraft was just not ready to land on the moon. So the flight directors and the top NASA officials came together, and they said, listen, it looks like the Russians are going to try to do this about the 3rd week in December and orbit the moon with 3 cosmonauts with their N-1 rocket. So we're going to try to beat them there, and again, to show the world that we can. And so we're going to launch Apollo 8, and it's going to go around the moon and orbit with our 3 American astronauts, and that's going to be, right there about Christmas time. So and it worked, and it did. It was Jim Lovell, Frank Borman, and Bill Anders, and they were the first 3 Americans to ever ride the Saturn V. And when that ride, those guys had, Frank Borman and Jim Lovell, had been into space before. They'd been up in space for 2 weeks in Gemini 7. And when those guys rode that Saturn V for the first time, these veteran astronauts, they were just like, oh boy, nobody's ever ridden anything like this. That unbelievable launch vehicle that's never been even thought about being close to passed. Yeah, so anyhow, Apollo 8 goes around the moon without the lunar landing module, and as y'all remember, the lunar lander was what saved Apollo 13. So if the same accident that happened in Apollo 8 happened with Apollo 13, Apollo 8 would have never made them home. They would have been lost in space. But the Russians couldn't get their N-1 rocket together, and Apollo 8 orbited the moon, and the other Apollo missions followed, and Neil Armstrong landed.
But once again, what was I understand the accomplishment. All right, I understand the accomplishment about putting a human on the moon. But What did we actually learn, or what did we actually gain from all this money that was spent?
Well, I tell you what, that's a very good question, Rob. And if you go, just go onto your computer and Google helium-3 and watch what comes up. Now, when the astronauts went to the moon, of course, they collected moon rocks.
Yeah.
And they, from all the different sites that they landed, they brought moon rocks back. And there's something very interesting that they found. It's called helium-3. And helium-3, physicists tell us now, is very rare on Earth, but very common on the moon. And they also believe that it's very possible to make basically a reactor, and where the helium-3 could liberate one of the helium molecules and atoms and make energy without radioactivity. And it's estimated that one train load or space shuttle full of helium-3 could power, say, Canada for a year in electricity without any harmful side effects of radioactivity. So there's your answer right there. And guess who has satellites orbiting the moon right now surveying for good spots to look for helium-3?
I would say China.
China does. China does. India does, and so does Japan.
Right. So, right,
helium-3, oh my gosh. It's all over the moon and ready to be taken back.
So the Americans landed on the moon, and India, Japan, and China are going to prosper from the hard work and dedication that was done by the Americans.
Well, you know, a lot of countries do the spearheading and other countries follow up. It just, seems like it works like that sometimes.
All right, but if this is such a great scientific find, and you have 3 other countries that are surveying the moon because of this find, why isn't America going back to the moon instead of spending all its money and resources on Mars?
Very good question. Very good question. I think it's all about who's in the driver's seat. It's about which way the head's being turned and pointed. Very good question. I tell you, it's amazing. I think any if like Darrell in Surrounded by Thunder, he was telling me, he's like, when you see these, like the movies like The Right Stuff or Apollo 13, and you see the guys in the control room sitting at their monitors, those were the first PCs. Those were the first personal computers.
Right.
Those guys, they had Darrell told me they had a team of IBM. There was a team of 30 IBM engineers at NASA every day going, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do to make it work for you? And Darrell's job was guidance, and he said, listen, I need to watch the actual trajectory of this rocket as it goes up beside the theoretical. I need to see the theoretical perfect scenario trajectory, and then I need to see the actual rising beside it. And he said, can you put that on the same screen for me so I can watch that side by side? And there we go. So I think every aspect of the space program yielded amazing technology that we're still riding that wave today. I really believe that. And anytime we reach out, go somewhere new, do something new, go to Mars, go back to the moon, we're learning something new and finding new technology, which is, I think, is, why we're here.
And spending a lot of money that could be, in my opinion, be better spent on the homeless, the hungry, the sick, the poor, the unemployed.
Yeah, you know what? There's so many good points like that to be, and you're right. When you go down the street and you see somebody homeless and hungry, and you look at somebody else, and you see, well, why are we spending all this money on this? It doesn't make any sense. But at the end of the day, if you don't advance the civilization, then you go backwards.
But how can you advance a civilization just by going into space? Unless you take care of the problems here, you're not advancing. What you're actually doing is creating a decoy effect, because you're not looking at the problems here. You've got the focus somewhere else, taking your eyes and taking the public awareness away of what's right under their nose. And this is my opinion.
Well, you've got a good point, but let me give you an example.
Sure.
And this is an example. It's good, bad, or indifferent.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what happened during the Second World War. The most expensive project for Nazi Germany in the entire Second World War was the German V-2 rocket program,
Mm-hmm.
which was the first ballistic missile, which was Dr. Werner von Braun and Dr. Kurt Dubas working side by side. They created a rocket in 1943 that rose to 60 miles above the Earth in 60 seconds. Now, that was the most expensive project of the entire German war effort in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the seed of landing on the moon. Without that technology that was created for that war effort and all of that expense, then none of the other things that came to pass in 1969 would have been able to happen, or the space shuttle or Mars today. So even when you start out with something that has a very bad beginning, you can still glean something good out of it, I believe. But as you say, it's terrible when you go down the street and you see the homeless and the hungry.
And it seems that I understand that there's a lot of people who really believe we have to go out into outer space because we're going to one day deplete all the resources on this planet and we need to go somewhere else. We're overpopulating the planet. And the stories go on and on and on. But what I don't see happening is anyone solving the problems here on this planet. What they're doing is saying, all right, we need to go out into space to find another home because of what's happening here or what's going to happen here, instead of saying, hey, listen, why don't we take care of what's happening here, but still keep our eye and, keep things going, but not at the expense where we're taking resources away from the problems that would help solve a lot of the social problems that we're seeing today here on this planet. Global warming, like I was saying, illness, unemployment, hunger, and the list goes on and on and on. I'm sure that there are many people who would like to see this happen along with the space project. And the amount of money that is being spent on sending these robots to Mars for whatever reason they're going there, I still haven't figured that one out. Just to see, well, okay, yeah, all right, here we are on Earth. We're going to send a robot to Mars that's going to go all over the place. Wow, look, we can do it. And if, like you were saying, helium-3 is such a hot potential and is found on the moon, and if you have China, Japan, and India already up there doing surveys to find out where they can mine this very rare element because of its potential use here on this planet. In my way of thinking, I would want to be heading to the moon, getting the helium-3, bringing it back to Earth, or figuring out how to refine it on the moon so that I can start solving the problems here on this planet, getting rid of global warming and the entire trickle effect that this great discovery would have. This is what I don't understand.
Now you got a focal point. Exactly right. Yeah. You were mentioning before, spending all this money and all this a lot of terrible things and strife.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were mentioning that, I was taken back to in the book where I describe the situations on Earth in 1968 when Apollo 8 circled the moon at Christmas
mm-hmm.
time, and if you go back to 1968 and you think about what was happening, as one person put it, the only good thing that ever happened in 1968 was Apollo 8, and it was like Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated in April. Robert Kennedy was assassinated in the summer. the Vietnam War was just absolutely raging. Tet Offensive in February. It was just, things couldn't look much bleaker. I mean, the Cold War at full swing. So the only bright spot on the whole horizon that year, 1968, was Apollo 8, 3 astronauts, read from Genesis, first book of the Bible. Pretty amazing stuff.
Or was it just a diversion to get the people's mind off of what was happening, the reality of what was happening here on this planet?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It could very well be, but it worked. It made everybody look up for a second and say, well, if this can happen, maybe this is not the worst thing that could happen. Maybe people actually can work together instead of killing each other, and maybe this ultimate goal of 3 men circling the moon at Christmas time is a good thing. And maybe it was a diversion, but maybe it was a good diversion and made everybody kind of like look at each other and go, well, maybe there's hope.
If we would have peace on this planet right now, I'd agree with you. But very little's changed. The diversion didn't work. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with No, we've already done the news, so this is just a commercial break as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone with our guest, Tom Williams. He's the author of Surrounded by Thunder, the story of Darrell Lone and the Rocket Men. His website is www.lostandfoundadventure.com. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Nation, Tom Williams is our guest. His book is entitled Surrounded by Thunder, the story of Darrell Lone and the Rocket Men. His website is lostandfoundadventure.com. What do you say, Tom, to those who believe that the entire moon scenario, America landing on the moon, was nothing else but a big stage production, that men never landed on the moon?
Well, and when you bring that up to anybody that really knows, and the engineers at NASA, they all start laughing because it's so ridiculous. And then Surrounded by Thunder, down in Australia, Honeysuckle Creek, there's just one example of where they did the huge focused array of radio telescopes, and they were, listening to the broadcast from all the missions, and they could tell exactly where they were all the time. Because of the distance of the radio waves over through space. And besides, here's the real answer. Who wanted to prove that it was fake? Who wanted to prove more than anything and jump up and down on their soapbox and go, it's fake and we can prove it? I'm sorry, but the Soviet Union wanted to do that, and they tried real hard.
It wasn't the Soviet Union that produced the movie Capricorn 1.
No, but,
And I know for a fact that there are a number of Americans to this very day who believe that America never landed on the moon.
And you know what? That's just totally ridiculous. That's like saying, well, penicillin was never invented. It was, it's just ridiculous. Besides, not long ago, and you can look it up, they were fine-tuning the Hubble Space Telescope, and it focused on the moon. And they could see all the landing sites and all the gear we left up there, the sites of Apollo 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17. All those sites were clearly visible, even to the point you could see the footprints still there. So it's fact. That's just not even worth answering.
So tell me, what's your opinion about the privatization of space?
I think that would be like saying, okay, the privatization of the oceans. Spain said, no, we can go in the Gulf of Spania, the Gulf of Mexico, the Golfo de Spania, in the 1500s. That's our place. You can't go there. Well, everybody went. And the Portuguese said, you can't go into the Sea of Japan. That's ours. And, well, everybody went. So it's the same kind of thing, I think.
How do you think it's going to work out with the mineral rights on the moon if and when China, Japan, and India start bringing mineral deposits of helium-3 back to Earth for refining, or start refining on the moon?
I tell you what, I think there's so much of it, there's not going to be a fight. It's just going to be like going and, like going out to the Great Salt Flats and
Right.
and out west and digging up some salt and putting it in a molten salt box. I think it's going to be that easy.
All right, you and I have to take our say so long for tonight. I want to thank you so much for joining me, Tom. It's been a great pleasure. I wish you much success. And,
Thanks, Rob.
Exo Nation, visit his website. It's lostandfoundadventure.com. And his name is Tom Williams. The name of his book is Surrounded by Thunder, the story of Darrell Lone and the Rocket Man. And I'll be back on the other side of this news break at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center. Whoa, Craig, in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. You can listen to the X Zone 724 365 at www.xzoneradiotv.com. And also check out the new, the new Wiki, what's it called? Wiki Publishing House e-bookcase at www.wikipublishinghouse.com. I'll be back on the other side of this news break. Whatever you do, don't go away.